Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. You can support this podcast on patreon.com/firstpawmedia.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by First Paw Coffee Company, specializing in private label premium blend coffee. If you're serious about coffee, you should check it out. First Paw Coffee's passion is high-quality, small-batch roasted coffee. They take the extra time to taste and get everything perfect before they release new blends. They aim to bring you a cup of happiness each time you pour yourself some coffee. Find out more at ak.dog/free and enter for a chance to win some First Paw Coffee prizes, a book from our collection, and tote bag. One winner will be selected at random each month. That's ak.dog/free.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Robert Forto, and you're listening to our daily coverage of the 2022 Iditarod, the 50th running of the last great race here in Alaska. And I am joined today by my co-host this year. Her name is Toni Reitter, and she is calling in from the hubbub of Anchorage and all that's going on down there after the ceremonial start. Toni, how's it going today?
Not too bad. I am drying out after being out in the very wet and wild, snowy conditions here in Anchorage all morning.
You know, it's been an interesting winter, hasn't it? Ups and downs in terms of snow. Lots of snow up here in Willow for the start. And then we've had a couple of freeze-thaw cycles and some major storms. It may be a different kind of race at the very beginning, won't it?
Yeah, you know, everyone was talking about how it was going to be too warm and too sunny, and the trail wasn't going to set up, and it was going to be nasty ice. And now they had no problem here in Anchorage, and I hear that it's going to be snowy all the rest of the day and night. So I think we're going to have a nice little bit of snow-packed trail out there in Willow.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great day. So let's do a couple of housekeeping things before we jump into today's episode. For new folks that are just joining us, this is our daily coverage, of course, of the Iditarod here on Mushing Radio and KVRF 89.5 in the Valley. And we will be here every day until the banquet, so about 2 weeks from now or so. And what we usually do is we talk about the day's news and notes, give a story or two, and give our quote-unquote expert opinions about what's happening on the trail. Toni is a long-time Iditarod volunteer, and I am a dog musher. I've been dog mushing since the mid-90s, have not run Iditarod yet, but I know a thing or two about the sport and hopefully can provide that insight. So we're going to jump right into it. Toni, as I mentioned, you're a volunteer. You took part in some of the festivities today, and I want to get to that in a second, but can you sort of run down what the ceremonial start is and why it's so important for this race?
Sure. It's kind of now like almost the Olympic opening ceremony, where it's just a big celebration of the sport and really the race. Back at the beginning of the race, they didn't even start downtown like they do now. They started over by what is now Tozier Track. But now they start from 4th Avenue downtown and wind their way about 11 miles through Anchorage over the different trails that get used throughout the year, biking, jogging, skiing, all of that. And really it's one of their big fundraisers. All the sponsors come out. Some of them get to ride in sleds, and then they also have what they call their Iditarod auction, where people bid to ride in different Musher sleds. So they get an 11-mile tour of Anchorage that only happens once a year. So it's a really exciting time. People trailgate instead of tailgate. There are different sections along the trail where people have barbecues, people have beer. So there's no race aspect to it. It's just fun. The mushers, I'm sure, have a little bit of anxiety just maneuvering through a big city. But at the same time, it's very relaxed. The dogs aren't trying to break any speed records or anything like that. It's just a celebration of mushing and Alaska culture and history.
And you mentioned the Iditarod program, and that is where a lucky fan gets to pick their favorite musher and literally ride in the sled with the musher and the dogs. It's a heck of an experience. I've been on the runners of the tag sled several times, and those people have the time of their lives, and some of them like it so much that they eventually become dog mushers, and I think one or two of them has even run Iditarod after they've done that auction. I guess my first question to you is regarding that. Do you know if there's ever been a time where a musher did not have an Iditarod because nobody picked them? There was, something happened like that where they went with an empty sled.
Yeah. No, I can't think of a time where there was an empty sled. I do know of several years where we were all surprised as volunteers out on the trail to find out that there were extra teams coming at the end of the parade of mushers, and it was just because teams had dropped out late, and so somebody had already bid on a sled, and so they just asked another local musher if they would just go ahead and run in the ceremonial so that the Iditarod could still have their moment. Even though they weren't riding with necessarily a team that was getting ready to go down the trail. But I can't, in at least recent memory, remember a time when there was an empty sled.
And I have a vague memory of somebody getting hurt during the ceremonial start, get a concussion or something like that, and had to withdraw after the ceremonial start. Do you remember that?
I do, and I can't remember. There have been several scratches, quote unquote scratches, after the ceremonial start. Sometimes I think it was Charlie Bolding who just wanted one more Iditarod start so that he could wave goodbye to all of the fans, but then he decided not to actually run the Iditarod. But I can't remember who it was. But yeah, there was one. I don't know if it was a concussion, but it had something to do with a crash that they had. I almost want to say it was a sled issue or an equipment issue that kept them from continuing on. But man, now I'm going to have to go back into my files and see what I can find.
That is our homework for tonight, and we'll report back on that tomorrow. As you mentioned, Toni, it's kind of a circus, a big fanfare event downtown, lining the streets of Anchorage, especially in the very popular years before the pandemic and all that. There were literally thousands of people down there, and it looked like the Rose Bowl parade or something with dog teams. And then they leave every 2 minutes, just like they will tomorrow at the restart, starting with that first musher, actually starting with an honorary musher, the first musher, and then going on through the 49 mushers that we have today. And then they work their way through Anchorage, as you mentioned, on city streets, on trails, over highway overpasses, by hospitals, the whole 9 yards. They get an experience, and it's the same exact trail that they run the Fur Rondy Sprint mushing races the weekend before. So it is definitely a trail that is well used, as you said, by fat bikers and snow machiners and walkers and the whole 9 yards all year long. And I know as a volunteer, you're not down in the hubbub of the city where all that's happening. You are a little off trail. Where are you located, and what is your job?
Okay, so I am the area coordinator for my crew of trail guards over by the Alaska Native Medical Center. So it's changed a lot over the years. My grandfather was the original area coordinator for that when it was just known as Tudor Crossing before all of the buildings went up. And back then it was a lot like how they do some of the streets downtown, where the volunteers, you had to shovel the snow onto the road, let the dogs pass, and then also kind of keep the traffic from getting in the middle of it and making sure, you know, if the dog team was coming, traffic stopped and whatnot. Now, of course, that area of Tudor has grown up exponentially with not just the medical center, but everything around it. So they have an overpass and everything. So we don't have to do anything with traffic control. It's just basically crowd control and making sure that when a team is coming down the trail, nobody's in the middle of it, because nobody wants to get run over by a 14-dog team. And it's not fun. I have experience in that. But it's really one of the, I don't want to say easiest jobs, but it's very laid back. Again, because it's a ceremonial start, we're all having fun. We're not necessarily having to keep people so far back that they can't experience having a musher come up and give them a high five or anything like that, like you'll see in Willow and other parts of the race, where the mushers really are just focused on racing. The mushers throw out candy, they throw out booties. One year there were Mardi Gras beads for the kids and the fans. Sometimes they'll stop if they see somebody, a family member or a friend, they'll stop, give them a hug, and you're sitting there going, what's the holdup? So it's just a lot of fun. Our crew has been, like I said, there since, well, before I was born. So it's kind of a changing of the guard. Most of the people that worked at least a few years with my grandparents, if not longer, have told me that this was the 50th running. They've been doing it for almost 40 years. They're good. This was going to be their last one. So if anybody's looking to join a trail guard next year, hook me up, hit me up, and I'll see what I can do.
Very good. Now, you had mentioned that that's at the Tudor crossing. How far into the ceremonial start is that in terms of miles?
I believe it's 5 or 6 miles. I think I've been told over the years that it's 7 miles, but some mushers that I know say that it's actually closer to downtown than we think. So I don't know if the trail has changed over the years or if it's like a fishing story. It just keeps getting longer as time goes on, and we like to talk about it. So I'm going to say it's roughly 5 to 6 miles. So right kind of in the middle of the trail for the ceremonial.
So about halfway, and if all things works out, including this year with 49 mushers, that's about 100 minutes from the time the first musher starts until the time the last musher starts, meaning they go every 2 minutes. Now, there can be, as you mentioned, some hiccups along the way where they stop or they crash or whatever, but eventually they all make it down the trail and end up at the end of the ceremonial start, which is at an old airstrip. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, they take out at Campbell Airstrip, where right there by the BLM area. And I've never been down there, so I don't know exactly how that all works. But this year, my understanding was it was not open to the public as much as it has been in the past.
Yeah, I've been down there a couple of times, especially after helping a friend launch off from the ceremonial start and then jumping in the dog truck and collecting all the gear, jumping in the dog truck, and then working our way through the busy streets of Anchorage to be there to set up the dog truck and get the food and the water and all that ready for the dogs. It's a chore in of itself. The handlers, we always got to give those guys props because they work hard for sure. But as you mentioned, yes, as you mentioned, it's a huge party. Everybody's having a good time. And then after the ceremonial start, what's happened in the past, I'm not sure how that's working out now since we're sort of in the pandemic, but we're not, meaning the restaurants and bars are open. But typically, most of the mushers will pack up all of their gear there at the airstrip, and then a lot of them will meet with their fans. They'll do some last-minute preparations. They'll have barbecues and restaurants and all these sorts of things. Or they do what some mushers do and just find that time to have that last good meal, that last night's sleep before tomorrow, before they hit the big time with the restart in Willow. Do you have a quick story about a musher that you may know about their routine or what they like to do on Ceremonial Start evening?
The mushers that I know or talk to, most of them are more introverted, so it's more like, all right, we did the ceremonial start, we did all of our meet and greets earlier this week, which of course didn't happen this year, with the pandemic. So I think it's just more of a personal thing where, it's just the last minute prep, go over all of the lists one more time after 1,000 times going over it earlier in the week. Anything that they noticed in the ceremonial start as far as dogs and maybe needing to swap out for one of their reserves that they've had checked out by the vets earlier in the week. They make that final determination, hopefully by Saturday evening, over who their team truly is going to be for the Willow start. But yeah, I don't know of any like truly specific routine. I just know that a lot of them just want that last quiet downtime, like you said, get their favorite meal in. They won't actually be sleeping, but they're going to try to sleep.
Right.
And then they hopefully are ready for Willow in the morning.
And that leads us to our next topic. The race starts in Willow. It's about 65 miles from the ceremonial start, just a couple of miles up from the road where we're at. It starts right there on Willow Lake in a newly remodeled community center. And I'm not sure if the community center and all that stuff is open this year again because of COVID, but it's typically a carnival atmosphere in terms of the fans, but not for the mushers. Most of the time they're pretty focused and they have their heads on straight and they're ready to rock and roll because now it means business. The mushers start to arrive early in the morning, and then a lot of the fans take buses up from Anchorage. There are several buses that pick up at hotels and schools along the way, and you can ride up here for, I believe it's $2. Where in the world can you do anything for $2 these days? But you can take the bus up, then you don't have to worry about parking, which is a real chore, and trying to get out of there after the restart is a scene in of itself. And then it's on the trail, and then they're rocking and rolling on their way to Nome. And it's exactly like it is with the ceremonial start. Number 2 starts at exactly 2 p.m., and then they work their way down the line for about 100 minutes or so until the last musher is on the trail. And we'll talk about what happens at the restart tomorrow. But is there anything else you would like to mention about the ceremonial start before we jump into some maybe news or notes or even our story or musher profile of the day?
Sure. We have the same idea talking about the bus situation in Wasilla. It's $2 round trip. If you're coming from Anchorage, it's a $25 round trip ticket.
Gotcha.
If you're not a volunteer, volunteers are $15. And I will say that if there's another way you can get out there from Anchorage, do it. Just because I've done the bus and they use like the little school buses, but I swear they're just for like kindergarten-sized children. So if you're long-legged like my dad or myself, you end up with your knees touching your ears. So it's not the most comfortable ride for that 65 miles.
Right. But if you are an out-of-towner, and I know that rental cars are hard to come by these days.
Yes.
If you cannot find a ride, $20 is still a pretty dang good deal to get up there and relax and then on your way back. So let's talk about any stories that have developed over the time since we were on last night. I know that, like we said, this is sort of a low-key event today. We didn't have any scratches or injuries or anything like that to report, but have you heard any news or notes that you want to share?
I haven't seen a whole lot of news. It seems like everyone had a really good time on the ceremonial. I'm sure I'll see more this evening as people start posting things once they start thinking about what's going on, what had happened and everything. I know in our section, we have a corner. Everyone talks about the Cordova corner, but we have a corner that's a very sharp turn. And so we have a lot of tag sleds and even the main sled crash and burn every year. And so I saw a giant crowd right there at that corner, a bigger crowd than I was expecting. I think the biggest story for me was I don't know what it looked like downtown. I don't know what it looked like elsewhere. But in our section, we normally have a pretty decent sized audience all the way through our section. And this year it was much smaller than anticipated. And so I don't know if the weather played a factor. I don't know if the fact that there are more buildings now in that area and less parking available, if that was an issue. I hope that it was better attended downtown and elsewhere along the trail. But for the most part, you know, it was one of those ceremonial starts that it went off well. There was no news of moose that I'm aware of. I know that we had moose on the trail before the start, but they wandered off before any of the dog teams came through. So it was a well done ceremonial start, even though it did feel kind of like we talked about last night. Like it didn't really feel as big and momentous as the 50th should have had. I think a lot of it just has to do with the pandemic. And then, of course, the snow today that nobody was prepared for. Everybody thought we were in actual spring. So well played, Alaska weather.
Right. And I saw on Facebook or Twitter that you mentioned, we talked last night about it being pretty low key at the hotel where you're at, the Inlet Towers, which is sort of a
Yep.
kind of a hotbed of activity. And you mentioned it was pretty slow there when we were on, but I guess that really picked up in the evening after.
It did. We came back from, I don't even remember where we had come back from, I think dinner. And all of a sudden there's dog trucks like lining the perimeter of the parking lot. And then they must have had family or what, because there was no parking. We had a heck of a time finding a place to park. And then this morning when we woke up to get ready to go out and trail guard, which it was way too early to be up, but it's only once a year. I look out and you could already hear, because I have the window open, you could already hear some of the dogs barking. They had brought them out to snack them, stretch their legs. And there were even more dog trucks than when we went to bed last night. So it was really kind of exciting, and it started to really feel like Iditarod when the Husky Homestead and Brent Sass's team and the CV teams, and I think it was Anya who was also out there with the Swamp Dogs. And so it started to sound like Iditarod, that sound of just dogs being happy and excited and let's get going.
Yes.
And so that was really nice. It really made me feel like Iditarod. I kept telling my dad all the way over to where, when we were driving over to our spot, I was like, I'm at Iditarod. And he's like, no, you're in Anchorage. Iditarod's a little further.
Yes. Yes. Speaking of which, I'm sure we'll talk about that much later in our coverage, but this year happens to run the northern route of the trail, and they switch back every year from that north and south route, and then on a rare occasion they will start in Fairbanks, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as we're working our way through the coverage, and we'll tell you exactly what the differences are between the north and the south route on those shows for sure. So, Toni, this is the time where we typically do Alex's special, his Musher of the Day, and we're going to try to our best to continue that tradition, but we're going to do it a little bit different this year. Is he always kept it a secret from me and did not tell me who the Musher of the Day was the day previous, and I had no idea who he's going to talk about. So it was a surprise to me, as it was to our listeners. But we're going to tell our listeners who the Musher of the Day is the day before, so you can get a little bit of a heads up, maybe cheer them along the trail as we talk about them. And if you're on Facebook and their fans or family is on Facebook, let them know about our podcast, and they can listen to and hear the story that we tell about that Musher. So, Toni, who is your pick for the Musher of the Day tomorrow?
Oh, goodness. I didn't even think about this. I want to look into Kaylin Davis a little bit more. She's one of the rookies this year. She's running dogs. Some of them are hers. Some of them are Wade Mars's dogs that he of course, moved out this past summer with his family. They're now in, I believe, Wisconsin. He's running a lot of races down there, and he chose not to do Iditarod this year because of the COVID policy and his personal views on the vaccination and all of that, which totally respect him for being upfront about it. And he didn't pull the whole, word play on immunized versus vaccinated and all of that. So, no judgment there on my part at all. I really respect Wade. I think he's a great guy. But Kaylin and I can't remember the other musher that's run some of the stump jumping kennel dogs that Wade left in their hands, knowing that they were going to race those dogs. I really kind of want to look into that a little bit more and see what we can come up with for tomorrow.
All right, so Kaylin Davis is our musher of the day tomorrow, and that's a big deal because it's the restart of the race, and we will carry on with that tradition that Alex has done for 10 or 11 years, and their fans and friends and family really like it when we talk about their favorite musher on the show. But tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Joe Reddington. So he is our first musher of the day, and I know you have some information to share from Barb Reddington. And I know Barb, and she is an amazing advocate for Iditarod and carrying on the family name and all of that. And I'm looking forward to hear what you have.
Sure. So for those that maybe don't know, Joe Reddington Sr., of course, the father of the Iditarod, the one that came up with this crazy idea that dogs could run 1,000 miles over the course of a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and now it's down to 8 days and change. He was chosen as the honorary musher for the 50th Iditarod, which is very fitting, of course. And I did not get to hear what they said about Joe at the mushers banquet, the mushers banquet that didn't have any mushers at it banquet. And he, the only thing that I noticed was Barb wrote a touching tribute about her father-in-law to the world of Facebook. And she said, this is what I would have said about Joe. And so I just wanted to read what she wrote because I thought it was so touching and a very great picture of someone who I think for most fans has become just a legend. Kind of like Walt Disney used to be a person, now he's Walt Disney the legend. And for Iditarod, that's who Joe Reddington has become. So Barb wrote, "What a great honor for a great man. Astounding to see and be a part of this 50 years later. I am proud that grandson Isaac Reddington accompanied me, as he is a great grandson of Joe's and a young musher with aspirations of participating in this last great race in the future. Joe used to say he was born in a tent along the Chisholm Trail, Kingfisher, Oklahoma, and I always thought it was fitting that he came from one trail to another, the Chisholm Trail to the Iditarod Trail, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, and I'm sure my dad is cringing in the other room. Joe homesteaded his family to Alaska in 1948, and when I think of Joe and all of his accomplishments, the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, the summit of Denali with a dog team, Bush Pilot, 200 dog team hookup to commemorate the centennial year of 1976, participation in the inaugural parade of Ronald Reagan in 1981, Lillehammer for the Winter Olympics, dog races, 19 Iditarods for Rendezvous, Kinnick 200, Coldfoot Classic, Cusco 300, Alparad, John Bear Grease in Minnesota, Alaskan of the Year, and so much more to mention. It's wonderful to see his good friends present, John Norman and Jeff Schultz, Brian and Kay Gabbard. Sorry if I missed anyone else, she says. She says, when I think about Joe, I think about his family, his wife, Vi, son Joey and Pam, kids Joey, Ray, and Heather, son Ramey, kids Alyssa, Ray Jr., Vernon, Ryan, and Robert, his daughter Sheila, sons Jerry and James, son Tim, and his daughters Lori and Lisa. When I think about Joe, I think about all of that. Then I think about Joe. And I just thought that was such a good tribute, and it humanizes someone that I think most fans and mushers have come to idolize. So I just wanted to make sure that we remember Joe on the the first day of the 50th Iditarod.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. I did not get a chance to read that. I saw it in passing on Facebook, and I'm glad that you shared it. I liked what you said at the very beginning, where you said that he has become the legend, and you had mentioned Walt Disney. Walt Disney is not just the man anymore, he's Walt Disney, the legend. And I think here in Alaska, Joe Reddington is that person, and in his little area of the world up here in South Central in the Knik area, that family is very revered. Of course, they have the old homestead and they have the Hall of Fame there. They even have, I believe it's a middle school, is it not, that is named after the Reddingtons, and I believe they are the Huskies, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe you're correct.
That is such a cool way to go, and thanks again for having Joe as our first Musher profile of the evening. We've never really spoken about his all of his accomplishments and that legacy on the show before, I don't believe. So thanks again. So Toni, what is happening with you over the next 24 hours? What is your role as a volunteer, as a fan, as just somebody that is immersed with Iditarod, and you have been your entire life? What's happening for you until now and when we speak again?
So now I kind of relax. My job is done. I work the Anchorage Trail, and then I become a fanatic again, a quasi-stalker. No, not really. We're just going to chill here in Anchorage because I see the snow is coming down in giant flakes again. So I think we're just going to hang out here tonight. And then tomorrow we'll drive up to Willow. I'll hopefully be able to do some live tweeting, maybe some video, and then just take a ginormous amount of pictures. So I'll get to do a little bit more of the fan side of things. I'll get to do a little bit more of my wannabe reporter side of things. And then from there, we come back to Anchorage, and then it's a 3-hour drive home on Monday, and then I follow the GPS tracker with everybody else.
Excellent. And you had mentioned pictures, and I know that you are a very good photographer, especially with sled dogs. And I know that our plan is to share some of those photos on the show notes pages, and we've never done that before. We've done them as tiles and logos and things for our individual shows, but I look forward to sharing some of your work and linking back to your blog. It's all about the backlinks. If you know anything about SEO, guys, that's some behind the scenes techie stuff. So it's all about the backlinks. So hopefully we can do that. So my last thing for our show tonight, Toni, is you had mentioned that you hope to do some tweeting, and I know that there are all ways to follow the Iditarod, whether it's the Insider or the news channels or whatever. You've been doing this a long time. Aside from Twitter, what are some of your favorite go-to places to follow the race over the course of the next couple of weeks?
Right. I really like not only, following Twitter because that's where a lot of the news sites just throw out the little clickbait articles or whatever, but I like following the Anchorage Daily News is always a really great source, so adn.com. The local Anchorage news station, KTUU, is the official home of the Iditarod for local news. So they're alaskasnewssource.com. And then I really like KNOME, which is the radio station out of Nome. They always have some really interesting things. And then the Alaska version of NPR, they have, I believe they're going to have the Iditapod this year. I have not actually looked because I'm a bad person and didn't look before we went to do this podcast. So they're another great resource, and they're always on Twitter when they're doing all of their little research. They have a lot of great articles. So I like to follow that because most of the time those sources have reporters that are on the trail and in the checkpoints, and so they get to bring that story to us in a way that isn't just the official, whatever Greg Heister and Bruce Lee feel that Iditarod fans want to see. So we get a little extra stuff with those other reporters out there.
And of course, a shameless plug for our own podcast. I encourage everybody that's listening to subscribe, and you will get a little bit different coverage than a lot of those other sources that you mentioned on your favorites. Some of mine are, of course, Iditarod.com. That is a go-to place for me, especially for standings and the Musher profiles and all of that. That's sort of my go-to spot. Another favorite of mine are the individual pages for all of the mushers on Facebook. Often, a lot of these guys and gals will have somebody, whether it's a family member or a friend or a handler or somebody that's doing race updates for the individual person that, of course, that is the owner of that page. And those guys provide excellent commentary. And of course, we cannot leave out Danny Seavey, probably one of the best in terms of Facebook reporting. He does an excellent job. Is he going to be back on this year? I know you're down there pretty close in terms of geography with the Seavies.
I haven't seen or heard what his plan is. I know he's been very, very busy. He has growing children, and so I'm not sure what his plan is, but every year he says this is not going to be a year that he blogs, and then that's all he does. Because like all of us, he's just as much a fan of this race as the rest of us. So I would not be surprised to see Danny doing at least a little bit of vlogging during the Iditarod.
Always a great source and up-to-the-minute information and a great perspective, of course, not only from a legacy family that's been around forever, but also an Iditarod finisher a couple of times over. So a great source for that information. Toni, it is a pleasure to have you on this year. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to the next couple of weeks together. And for folks that are listening, please let us know your comments on whatever social channel that you're following or listening to us on, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, Google Play, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you are listening, drop us a comment. And if we see it, we'll definitely reply as well. And if you have questions, let us know. And if I can't answer it, I will tag Toni in it, and she will do her best to answer that as well. We will see you guys tomorrow on the show. We'll be on sometime in the early evening, at least Alaska time, but it's a 24-hour cycle in Iditarod. So if we are on at 9 o'clock, that's still pretty early in Iditarod time because a lot of the guys will go throughout the night. So there's always stuff happening 24 hours a day. So Toni, we'll talk to you tomorrow night, all right?
All right, sounds great.
Thank you. On behalf of my co-host, Toni Reitter, this is Robert Forto for Mushing Radio. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From Dogworks Radio, this is Mushing Radio. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you'll see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Alex Stein and Robert Forto. Our producer is Robert Forto, created for Dogworks Radio.
So earlier, you learned about First Paw Coffee Company. Now I'm going to tell you about its Trailbreaker Blend. First Paw Coffee Company's Trailbreaker Blend is inspired by our love of the Northern Lights, frosty paws, and sled dog trails. How cool is that? The Trailbreaker Blend is a private label premium blend that was developed just for them. It's a medium dark roast from Central and South America, highlighting flavors of brown sugar, hazelnut, and plum. Be sure to go to ak.dog/free and enter to win a bunch of cool prizes. That's ak.dog/free.